want to also welcome our external auditors, Deloitte, who is present, and of course you'll be hearing more from them as the meeting progresses. Now, if you are a presenter, we want to indicate to you that you use the microphone, ensure that the green light is on, so that all in the room and those who are watching online can hear you loudly and clearly. This meeting will be streamed live, and as such it's imperative that you speak audible so that all can hear your contribution to this meeting. For the records, we will now have the roll call. Anil Agwal will proceed.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So from the audit committee, we have Mr. Victor Gonzalez,
Present.
Mr. Mark Kaplan,
Present.
Mr. Richard Koo,
Here.
and then from the finance team, to my right, Mr. Jeff Lesnoy.
Present.
We have from Deloitte, Jill Strohmeyer,
Present.
Alexander Harvey,
Present.
Darshan Patel.
Present.
From finance team, we also have Amita Patel,
Present.
Judith Francis,
Present.
Georgiana Okoroji,
Present.
Ayat Lee,
Present.
Maria Perez,
Present.
Pakhon Ho,
Present.
David Sunshine.
Present.
From law department, we have Jason Goldberg.
Present.
From compliance, we have Brad Greenberg.
Present.
From the CEO's office, we have Vilma Huertas.
Present.
So we have the quorum in terms of the audit committee, and we can start the meeting. Terence?
Thank you very much, Anil. Mr. Chairman, we have a comprehensive agenda this morning, detailed one. And the first item we have on this agenda is approval of the Audit and Finance Committee minutes of April 17, 2023.
So moved.
That's been moved
Second.
and that's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
That's been unanimous. That's been carried. We want to move straight into the New York City Housing Authority, the Consolidated Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for the year 2022. We have our own Jeff Lesnoy, who will lead out in this area.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'd like to discuss a couple of highlights first. A couple of highlights first relating to the financial statements, which will have overriding presence in both NYCHA's and LLC-1 statements, and give you a better idea as you look at the statement of net position and the statement of revenues. So first of all, one of the key aspects that occurred in 2022 was the implementation of GASB 87, the lease pronouncement, which establishes a uniform approach for lease accounting based on the principle that leases or finances of underlying assets. And these are right-to-use assets. They're a different class of assets than we've had on our financial statements before, but they are very significant. From a lessee perspective, we have 6 office leases and a couple of equipment leases with a total impact of $824 million in right-to-use assets. And these are in the capital asset section of our financial statements. They're amortized, like depreciation, over the life of the leases. We also have a corresponding lease liability for the same amount when we first recorded this, $824 million. So some big numbers there. From a lessor perspective, the numbers are smaller, but there's still compliance issues with the financial statements. So we have about 25 million of lease receivables we didn't have in previous years. We have a corresponding deferred inflow of resources for that. We evaluated hundreds, maybe over 1,000 transactions. We whittled that down to probably less than 100 transactions, which are eligible and qualifying for GASB 87. But there are a lot of documentation involved in order to go through the criteria and determine what made sense, what didn't, and what needed to be accounted for in the GASB 87. From a revenue recognition and expense recognition, there are changes in line items where items are reflected in the financial statements. In addition, there's changes in timing of when things are recognized. For example, in GASB 87, we have amortization, which is a significant item. We did not have that before. We have interest expense. We did not have that before. That replaced rental expense for the most part. And the items from a lesser perspective, from revenue and expense perspective, are more subtle, but they're still clear on the financial statements that there's a difference between past practice. From a cash flow perspective, actual cash flow, real cash coming in the door, there's no impact. But there is an impact on the statement of cash flows and presentation. And you would see some new line items on it that you haven't seen before. Kind of the most notable change is that there is a restatement of 2021 financial statements in order to be comparable to 2022 under GASB 87. And in doing so, we also needed to restate the net position, reducing it by $21 million, which is a relatively small percent of the total, but still it's something that needed to be done. So I think that is an item that we'll see in a lot of places on the statement of net position, the statement of revenues, in the notes. There's a lot of material there. So I thought it made sense for you to have an understanding of that. Second item of noteworthy events is rent collections. Not necessarily new. We've had some challenges in front of us since the pandemic began. And in front of you, there's a trend of rent collections. Pre-COVID, we had $1,058 million. 2020, $967 million. 2020 was not a full year. Pandemic started in March, so we had 2 clean months of rent collections. But things started to go downhill beginning in March of 2020. 2021, further drop. 2022, further drop. And you look at the inverse in relation to tenant arrears. We started off at $111 million at December 31st, 2019, and the amounts continued to rise. We're up at $439 million in 2022. So some big challenges there. During 2021 and in 2022, we put a lot of effort, NYCHA put a lot of effort working with tenants and sometimes doing work on our own to file ERAP claims. Emergency Rental Assistance Program, sponsored by the state. And there were about 33,000 households which participated in that. $128 million was filed through the closure of that. I think that was in January of 2023. During 2022 and up through the closure, we were having problems finding support in the state for funding of this. There were many more claims than funds available, and the state deprioritized public housing, and therefore public housing was at the bottom of the food chain at that point in time. So it wasn't clear as of December 31st at that point in time whether we would get the funds that we were expecting or not. But good news, on May 2nd, the New York State Senate and Assembly passed a budget bill to approve ERAP payments to pretty much everyone that applied, including NYCHA, covering the $128 million that we originally applied for. In addition, the bill included a couple of other items in there which were relevant to NYCHA. One of those was $35 million additional rent support for tenants to be determined down the road as to how NYCHA will allocate that among existing tenants. So in total, about $163 million of rent support will be coming our way, perhaps before the end of the year. It won't necessarily come all at once. It will come probably as applications are processed and approved individually, but we are expecting a big cash inflow. Victor, did you have a question?
Yes. Yes. So, by the way, that's great news. But the $35 million it hasn't been slated for anything in particular. It's just money we're gonna get, and then NYCHA was gonna decide where it goes? Or is it part of the ERAP program?
It's not specifically part of the ERAP program, but it's supplemental funds. So it is clear that it will be allocated to rent arrears. The only question is to who are the tenants? The tenants for the 128,000, they're defined, they applied or NYCHA applied on their behalf. They're 33,000 and those will be allocated accordingly. But I mean, from my understanding, and I'm not sure anything is final yet, NYCHA management discussed this and determined that it would probably allocate this to tenants that didn't get the ERAP awards. Tenants that were in arrears,
Right.
but didn't apply for one reason or another.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, you would think they might go for the tenants that have the big bill and get those out of the way. But I guess they're gonna spread it out with someone, let's say, owes $1 as opposed to someone who owes $10,000. Are they grouping them in, or is there a systematic way of taking that $35 million and assessing it to the larger amounts?
Yeah, I don't know that the decisions have been made on that yet.
Oh, okay.
I think it's still ongoing. I
It's
mean,
a thought.
the budget bill just passed in May.
Oh, okay.
There wasn't clarity to what was intended until recently, but, we will certainly get back to you on that.
Thank you. Just a thought.
Can I ask another question related to tenant revenues?
Yes.
Thank you. What steps is NYCHA taking to reverse the trends of non-payment by tenants? In other words, during the pandemic, I understand there was some understandings among the tenants that they didn't have to pay rent for some reason or other, that they were going to be forgiven that rent. They were not going to be evicted as a result of not paying. The question is what steps is NYCHA taking now to change that perception among tenants that they do in fact need to pay rent? And second, what steps are being taken for those who are not paying rent?
Well, I guess the first response I have to that is that for those tenants that applied under ERAP, there were restrictions as to what type of action, collection and legal action NYCHA could take for those tenants. So as long as they filed, they were protected. They couldn't be evicted, they couldn't be challenged in other court proceedings. So they were kind of on a hold basis. They weren't forgiven. It was not communicated that they were forgiven, but there was no aggressive collection tactics. At this point in time, now that the applications have been approved, there are actions that NYCHA can take. And NYCHA certainly can take action to create payment plans. Now that there's some relief given to those tenants might be able to see the light. When you have 36 months outstanding, you don't really see the point in paying 1 month rent when you can't pay the other 35, and there's still someone knocking on your door. So there will be, collective efforts at the NYCHA level in order to make best attempts to collect this. I mean, we never want to take legal action, but at the same point in time, we are willing to do that if necessary. The courts were kind of held up for a long time. There were moratorium holds on evictions, through early 2022. The courts have been backlogged since that point in time. So even the legal action that we have been trying to take, we can't push it all through at once. There's, a prioritization process. But, I mean, there is a plan. I'm not necessarily the best person to identify that. We can certainly, provide you a little bit more detail as to what the process will be.
Thank you.
How will the conclusion of where you're going affect the financial statement?
Put the mic on.
Sorry. How will the conclusion of the process by which you determine who you're going to try to collect from and how much affect the financial statement?
Well, the one thing that will affect the 2022 financial statements is $116 million of reversal of previously identified allowance for doubtful accounts. And that is the majority of the $120 million of ERAP claims that are outstanding, and we expect to receive that. And the reason for that is because we had originally anticipated reserves allowance for those amounts. And now that there's clarity that we will collect what we expected to originally, we are reversing the allowance and stating the financial statements properly. For the remaining funds, they were not anticipated to be received in our 2022 financial statements. So the $35 million, will likely have an effect in either bringing cash in the door before the end of 2023 or in reversing additional allowance on the books of December 31st, 2023. Now, as far as all the other collection processes and legal actions that may take place over time, that will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis and determine whether we think we have opportunity to collect. If our probability is higher, we'll reduce the allowance accordingly. But that's kind of an analysis process that needs to take place based on what is occurring at that point in time.
Thank you.
So the third highlight that I would like to bring up, which is a material item on the financial statements, is a pollution remediation obligation, namely lead-based paint. The lead-based paint obligations, which is part of the pollution remediation obligation, the major part, increased from $3.1 billion in 2021 to $3.7 billion in 2022. Now, there are lots of pluses and minuses there, which are creating movement in the liability. The biggest one is the New York City Local Law 66, which became effective December 1, 2021. And this defines lead at 0.5 milligrams per square centimeter, which is much stricter than the prior New York City 1.0 milligram standard. In addition, note that the federal standard is still at 1.0, and that's what we were guided by up through our 2021 financial statements. So under the new standard, we are required to test substantially all units of move-out. In addition, NYCHA has initiated a program to aggressively test and abate all units which have children under 6 in the apartments. And that's a higher standard, not just from a 0.5 milligram perspective, but also because there were certain exempt apartment units previously defined, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 apartment units, which were determined under the new law no longer to be exempt and had to be retested and evaluated for lead. So the combination of the stricter standard and the larger population involved is increasing our cost over the last couple of years. So we began to test under the 0.5 milligrams, about a year ago. And with 18% of the apartments tested through the end of April, we found that 35% of these units have been identified positive for lead. It's a pretty big increase compared to the old standard, where we concluded we had almost all of our apartments tested at that point, and we had 27% under the old standard. So the impact on our estimated cost is increasing by about $765 million due to this one factor alone. Pretty big impact. And we are only 18% of our apartments tested so far, we're only through 18%. We've had a pretty constant trend over the last few thousand tests. We've been coming in near 35%, but as we get into deeper testing and we get closer to 100%, we may find this moves up or down. We had always expected it would be higher than the 1.0, so we're not really surprised of an increase. The only question was how high was it going to be? Another point on pollution remediation is the HUD agreement which was executed in 2019. And it includes a $2.2 billion commitment from the city over a 10-year period to assist NYCHA in meeting various obligations, including lead abatement. And within an action plan signed by the monitor, $772 million was allocated specifically to lead abatement. Such funding, once it's received, and it's going to be over a 10-year period, will be recognized as revenue in future years on a cost reimbursement basis, as we do for other subsidies and grants that come through. And the key point there is that we had evaluated whether we had the ability to reduce our liability for the city's support. The city is supporting us with $772 million. We have a 3.6 pollution obligation. Can we reduce this obligation by 772? And after evaluation and research, we determined that would not be possible using the GASB 49 guidelines. So we will bill and receive these, as the work is done, and get reimbursed along the way and recognize revenue, not reduce expense. So those are the major highlights of the financial statements which I wanted to walk through before we get into the details.
I have a question about the number. When you talk about the liability, is that taking into account inflation over the period as well as the initial cost?
No, it's not. It's not. The GASB 49 does not provide for building inflation factors into this. Now, over time, we are required to continue to evaluate significant changes in liability. And if costs increase, then we will certainly boost liability up. But at this point in time, there's no requirement. In fact, it's not expected that you build inflation factors into GASB 49 liabilities.
I have a question concerning the $2.2 billion commitment from the city. Is that subject to annual appropriations and passing of the budget in order to be able to make sure that you get that 772? Or is that a capital item that the city has set aside over a 10-year period to commit that money? In other words, how certain is NYCHA that it's going to be receiving those dollars?
Hi, how you doing? I'm Brad Greenberg, the Chief Compliance Officer. So it's a capital item that they allocate in their capital budget. In addition to that, the city is a signatory to the HUD agreement. And if they were to want to reduce the amount of capital funds under the agreement, they would have to go through a process they have in the agreement with the HUD Secretary and Federal Monitor and the Attorney's Office. So it's, I think, as certain as you can get as an allocation, and it's a capital, not an immediate appropriation. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Excuse me, either one, we'll see. So recently I was speaking to Daniel Green, we were at similar places, and I asked them regarding this new lead abatement. And they have an aggressive program now that's doing more inspections than they were prior to getting these monies. So my question is, because of the aggressiveness of the programs that they're doing, the inspections they're doing now, this 772, will it run out before whatever the time frame is? Or are we gonna be able to ask or ascertain more in order to keep up with the aggressive program that we're doing now?
It's a great question. So you're right, we're doing a ton of testing at 0.5 and a lot of abatement, both in the PAC program and also on the public housing side. On the public housing side, we're abating more than 400 units a month now, based on the tests we get at 0.5. So there's a lot of lead that's being removed on a permanent basis, which is very positive, because once you remove the lead, you don't have to do any of the interim control work or visual methods, which get very costly. So as we remove lead from the portfolio, in both programs, the costs come down over time. The projection is based on cost estimates that we have for the abatement work, which varies based on the components we find that are positive. So if you have a lot of walls, for example, it's more expensive than if you can snap a component out of place like more easily like a window frame. So we try to base the cost estimates based on that. We have the money we have from the city, $771 million for lead abatement. We also have other grants from HUD that we've won over time for lead abatement. We also have the PACT program is doing a significant amount of lead abatement in some of the most contaminated properties. So we feel pretty comfortable among all the different sources of funds that we can get to a lot of the problem. And then in out years, kind of outside the agreement, the city's also made commitments around funding lead-related work. So I think we've got the money that we need, but more money is not a bad thing, so I don't think to say that.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
That clarifies.
thank you.
Okay, so now I'd like to go into the meat of the financial statements, and I'm going to address this kind of in a separate order than it's shown in the financial statements. We'll talk about the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position first. And we'll kind of walk,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to, before you go on, I remember that I asked a question in the last meeting and they've sent me an answer. And I just wanna know, I know it's not part of the agenda, but I have a question with regards to the answer that I received. And I'm talking about local law 97 as opposed to 33. And you guys gave me a response. It's gotta be done by 2050 or something. My question still remains, that's when it's got to be done in 2050. And I was asking how will it affect the finances? And my question is, I know it has to be done by 2050, when do you start? So if you start now, wouldn't that affect the expense?
yeah, of course, when we actually incur the expense, we would likely capitalize that. And
So the answer to that is, we haven't started yet.
I can't answer that.
Can you get back to me on that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the actual financial statements. We'll look at some of the highlights of key changes from year to year. We're not going to go through every line item. Of course, if there are questions on a particular line item, please feel free to ask. Operating revenues increased by 74 million, or 8%.
Excuse me, what page are you on the financials?
I think it's on the back of this. I think it's going on the back of this. Right here.
It should also be on your screen in front of you.
Page 5.
Right on the side.
Okay, what is this here? Oh, this?
Yeah, you have that?
If it's more convenient, it's also on the screen in front of you.
Okay.
Page 5.
Page 5? Okay.
That's what he said.
Thank you, got it.
Okay, so operating revenues increased by 74 million, or 8%, to $1,062 million. Now, that's a little odd considering we've been talking about rent revenue continuing to drop. But this number in the tenant revenue includes, can you drop the screen a little bit? Thank you. Okay, so for the tenant revenue, which has increased, it's largely because of the $116 million increase in the adjustment in the allowance for doubtful accounts relating to the ERAP approval. So excluding the impact of this ERAP adjustment, operating revenues actually would have decreased by 42 million or 5%. Now, there's a story behind that too, And it's a good story because for the most part, the bleeding has stopped. The PAC transactions are contributing to this drop in revenue. So between December 2021 and February of 2022, we executed multiple transactions packed. There were probably about 8 developments for 5,900 units. 5,900 units is approximately 4% of the apartment units at NYCHA. So of course, when there's a lot of background noise there. So of course, when you eliminate 4% of the apartment units, you can eliminate 4% of the opportunity for rent revenue. So that was Boulevard, Linden, Harlem River, and okay, so I think the largest impact of the adjustment, other than 116 million, is due to the PAC transactions. Otherwise, rent collection patterns are pretty similar to 2021. One thing to point out is that the ERAP was limited to 12 months rent. Many tenants have much greater than 12 months rent in arrears. The settlement of ERAP claims will provide the authority with more flexibility in the future in how we collect remaining rent, to payment plans and various legal actions where NYCHA was legally limited to do so in the past. So we do have opportunity, we need to make the best of the opportunity. And, you know, we of course would prefer keeping all the tenants in their homes and making them happy and collecting our rent. So we need to find a balance of all of that. Okay, looking at operating expenses. Operating expenses increased by 372 million or 9% to $4.7 billion. Included within operating expense are rent for leased dwellings, and this is really Section 8 rent payments. So it's not necessarily the expense load that NYCHA carries on for its public housing business, but it's what we pass on to our third-party landlords. This increased by 133 million due to higher housing assistance payments, HAP, per vouchers, and an increase in voucher units. So both the price we're paying and the number of units of vouchers that we're providing increased. And this expense over time will normally wash against the increase in Section 8 housing choice voucher subsidies that we get from HUD. But it depends on the particular time, and sometimes these things cross over into years. So we had a $60 million increase in the subsidy, which wasn't quite enough to cover the rent expense. But if I look back in 2021, we find the opposite situation, where the subsidy was actually higher than the rent paid. So I think over time, it tends to balance out. It's kind of a wash on our financial statements over the years. General and administrative expenses up by 212 million, largely due to increase in future claims expectations within the self-insured general liability program, and due to an increase in pension expenses due to changes in pension plan investment income. And the pension plan is impacted by volatile stock and bond markets in 2022. I think we found the opposite impact in the prior year, where there were gains and it reduced the expense. So this is going to kind of whipsaw back and forth depending on how the markets move. We have a couple of other small expense changes. Maintenance and operations increased by 69 million. Utilities increased by 49 million. But partially offsetting the above increases is OPEB, other post-employment benefits expense, which decreased by 99 million due to change in discount rate assumptions. The discount rate assumption in 2021 was 2.25%. The discount rate assumption in 2022 was 4.31%. And this is a direct impact of the Federal Reserve moves, so it was anticipated. but not necessarily a cash expense. Okay, moving on to non-operating revenues. This has a hodgepodge of different items, both revenues and expenses in it. It grew by 78 million, or 3%, to about $3.2 billion. And this includes subsidies and grants, which increased by 130 million. Within the subsidy and grants, there are a variety of different categories. Public housing subsidy was up by 113 million, that's good news, to 1.2 billion. Section 8 housing choice voucher subsidy up by 61 million to close to 1.5 billion in total. The City of New York subsidies were up by about 52 million over the 2021 level. And that's partially offset by a couple of smaller items. We had the CARES Act in 2020 and 2021. That program, expired as of December 2021. So we had $57 million collective CARES Act funding in 2021 and nothing in 2022. We also had a $42 million decrease in the federal capital funds used for operating purposes. But all in all, we did well with our subsidies. We were $130 million over last year. There are a couple of smaller items in the non-operating section. One of them, the loss from change in fair value investments. This relates to our investments in insurance-related securities, bond securities. And this loss was $42 million in 2022, which was a $29 million increase from prior year due to rising interest rates in 2022. So we marked to market these investments based on interest rates. This is the same kind of thing you saw in the news for the banking crisis, where everyone was holding treasury instruments and the value was having to be marked down as a result of interest rate increases. We don't have significant issue with that, but we do see some dollar impact on financial statements. Then the last item in non-operating revenues that I wanted to bring to your attention was interest expense. Although it's actually just 5 million lower in 2022 at 56 million, it's noteworthy to point out that half of this interest expense relates to GASB 87. Didn't exist before GASB 87. So we created a lease liability and we amortize this lease liability over the leases and we allocate interest expense and principal payments to that lease liability. So we have about 20, I don't have the exact amount in front of me, but let's just say about 25 to $28 million of interest expense in each year relating to GASB 87.
That's not, if you translate that into cash, what does it do?
Zero.
That's what I thought.
That's right. I mean, there is cash. There is cash relating to the lease transactions. There's always been cash. The cash hasn't changed. We just called it something different in the past. We called it rent expense. Now we call it interest expense and we call it amortization. And we have other names for other type of transactions. But we are in compliance with the rules. Okay, and we also have a special item. And this special item is kind of a defined term in the GASBs, but for us it reflects primarily costs related to the pollution remediation that occur. And this number relates primarily to the reduction in the testing, I should say the more stricter rules in the testing from 1.0 milligrams to 0.5 milligrams, which caused our lead findings to go up from 27% to 35%, and ultimately a large number came along with that. In 2021, we had a big number too, 649 million, and it was peripherally related to the same topic. Most of it was because even though we didn't know what the testing results would be at the 6.5 milligram level, we did know that we had 34,000 additional apartments that needed to be tested, that were previously carved out and no longer allowed to be exceptions in the process. So we had to add them to the pie. In addition, we had to retest, or we had to put an obligation up on the financial statements to retest everything, even though we had already tested more than 80% of the population. We had to retest everything. There was a large cost attached to that. So between 2021 and 2022, we had some pretty significant cost increases in our pollution remediation obligation. The last item on the statement of, the last couple of items on the statement of revenues is the capital contributions, 806 million, up by 48 million from prior year. And the capital contributions, the largest ones, came from the Federal Capital Fund, 302 million, FEMA, 228 million, City of New York, 180 million. Net position, 1,200 million at December 2022, down by 397 million from 2011, from 2021. And note that if not for the change in the City of New York lead standard, 2022 net position would have been greater than 2021 net position. So if we can get past the lead paint obligations and the costs related to it, we can get our net position to begin to rise again.
That's a very optimistic statement, though, isn't it?
It is optimistic, and I did say if, not that we would definitely do so.
Cold. Yeah. We turn the temperature down. We turn the air conditioning down a little bit. Yeah. Can I get warmer temperature? Temperature. Can I make it a little warmer? Okay.
I'm happy. I know.
Victor is shivering.
Well, that's not fair.
Are there any questions on this? Any questions on the statement of revenues and expenses before we move forward?
Yeah, I just have one little question, and that's the fair market value valuation. Is that theoretical, or is that when you actually sell bonds or whatever?
Well, this is unrealized at this point.
Unrealized.
So I guess you would call it theoretical. It's marking it to market. And, you know, we typically try to hold our securities till maturity.
Right.
So if we do hold everything to maturity, there'll be no losses. But on the other hand, we are required, based on the GASB, to mark these securities to market. And as, you know, these were issued at very low interest rates, very
Right.
low coupons, and the rates have risen, we've taken an unrealized loss.
Okay, thank you.
I'll be happy to give you a couple of typos.
What's up?
Next slide.
Can't see this.
Okay. So,
There's only one person that can see that slide. That's the person over there. Can you see the slides?
I can see
Have
this.
them in front of you.
isn't there one?
You got it right
They're in
there.
front of you.
And I'm nearsighted.
I'm nearsighted too. Thank you.
Now we can't see the bottom of it, though.
You have to see the bottom line all the time? Okay, that's a joke. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, so onto the statement of net position. Total cash and investments are on various different lines. We aggregate them. We have $1,284,000,000 at December 2022, which is a drop from the prior year, which was $1,638,000,000. So it's a $354 million decrease. largely due to continuing shortfalls in rental collections per spill, growing expenses, and certain timing differences in reimbursements from both FEMA and the city. Accounts receivable net increased by $219 million. $116 million of this is due to the reversal of the allowance on tenant receivables, and the majority of the remainder is due to timing differences in collections from the city. Capital assets in the aggregate increased by $352 million to $9,757 million due to continued increase in building improvements. Note that the capital assets already include $782 million of net right-to-use assets per GASB 87 in 2022, and $824 million of right-to-use assets in the 2021 financial statements. The high majority of these right-to-use assets represent assets for office leases such as 90 Church and Long Island City. Current liabilities 2022 already reflects a $92 million reclassification of OPEB liability expected to be paid during the next 12 months. And this was something that came up as per Deloitte's recommendations in its 2021 management letter comments, that we should break out our OPEB liability between non-current and current. So we've actually implemented that in 2022. However, at this moment, this $92 million is reflected in unearned revenues and other current liabilities on the net statement of net position, but we will reclassify this to a separate OPEB current liability line item, so we have more transparency on the final ACFR. Unearned revenues, current and non-current combined, is roughly flat to prior year after taking into account the above $92 million reclass to the OPEB line. Net pension liability increased by $514 million, largely due to a decrease in investment returns in 2022, resulting from volatile stock and bond markets. This was partially offset by a $460 million decrease in deferred inflows of resources for pension. OPEB liability decreased by $672 million, largely due to increase in discount rate from 225 to 431. This decrease was partially offset by a $417 million increase in deferred inflow of resources on OPEB. And then pollution remediation liability, current and non-current combined, increased by $619 million, largely due to the increase in positivity to 35% using the new 0.5 milligram standard. Less payments and expenses incurred during the year for work performed. So we are truing up the liability each year for substantial changes in assumptions, which may increase or decrease the liability. But we also perform work on a regular basis, whether it's tests performed or abatements processed or remediation work, and those costs are aggregated and charged to reduce the liability. Can we move the screen down a little bit? Okay, so I want to point out something in the net position area of the financial statements. During in the last couple of months, NYCHA discovered an error in its historical calculation of the net investment in capital assets. That's about 3 lines from the bottom. And I'm going to refer to that as NYCHA from now on. So this is a calculation where you take net position and you take capital assets and you subtract out the outstanding debt from those capital assets to come up with a new net position. And that's pretty much what we were doing, except that we missed some of the requirements in that we should also take into account other liabilities, not just debt issued for capital assets. Other liabilities like retention payable to vendors, accounts payable, other type of liabilities which we weren't doing. And we learned about this from GFOA, not because they identified it specifically in our financial statements, but it seemed to be a common problem that was permeating through the industry. They said more governmental filers provided this wrong than provided the correct one. So we looked into it and we determined that we had a problem there. And we discussed this with Deloitte, we quantified it. We made an adjustment in our 2022 financial statements for that. The adjustment is simply a reclass in net position between two line items that you see there, between the net investment in capital assets and the unrestricted deficit. It doesn't change anything in net investment. In that position, I should say. So we made the adjustment in 2022, and then we evaluated the impact on 2021 to determine whether this was material. We looked at this both from a quantification perspective and a qualitative perspective, and we determined after the evaluation that this was not material. Not only was it less than a 5% of the total, but it just reclassed between line items, and we couldn't really find the basis for users to utilize these results for any purposes. For example, governmental agencies like HUD and FEMA and the city and the state, they're concerned with revenues and how it's expended, not necessarily concerned with this statistic. Other potential users are debt holders, where we issue loans, or they actually purchase debt issued by HDC, which is kind of underpinning our loans. And, they use all the other types of measures. They use previous debt payment history. They might use debt reserves, debt service coverage. And in fact, in some of these transactions, they're concerned with revenue because the revenue is securing their payments, whether it be capital revenue from the capital fund program or operating from the operating subsidies. So in the end, we confirmed that this was not a material event, and we did not restate this. And we have had discussions with Deloitte on that, and this is where we are. So I wanted to point it out because it was a change from prior year practice. There was an error there. It wasn't a significant error, but still something that we wanted to bring to your attention.
How many, in terms of these three sets of numbers here, how many dollars have actually changed? Oops, sorry again. If we look at the three sets of numbers under net position, how many dollars changed as a result of this reevaluation?
In 2022, the number was something greater than 200 million. I don't have the exact number with me. Where we reclassified it between net investment and capital assets, non-restricted deficit. The number for 2021, had we made the restatement, would have been, I think, in the neighborhood of about 270 million, excuse me.
Well, the $220,000,
Yeah,
$2 million, that big number is already reflected in the 8 billion here, is that right?
The $200 million for 2022 is reflected in the net investment in capital assets.
Okay, so the mistake you referred to is only for the prior year.
Well, yeah, we had a historical issue, probably going back to the beginning of time, where these type of adjustments were not made. So there was an error in 2021. We evaluated 2021 for materiality, determined that it was not a material event, did not require a restatement. But we did correct it on a going forward basis for 2022.
So 2022 is the number in 2022 is inconsistent with the number in 2021 because you didn't make the change in 2021 because it wasn't material.
That's correct.
Okay, so somebody looking at this thing to see a comparative performance would not know that.
Well, that is true, but at the same point in time, we determined that this was not a material event.
Now, I understand what you're saying, but I'm also understanding that there is a change to the effect actually that isn't reflected in the financial statements.
Yes.
And the auditors are comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so before we go on to LLC 1, are there any more questions on NYCHA? LLC 1 will be very straightforward.
Can I just raise a question about section 8? Why is the subsidy for section 8 greater than the subsidy for public housing? Section 8 has a significantly less number of population being served, I gather, than PHA. So I'm looking at page 5 of the Consolidated Annual Comprehensive Report. And it said the authority was awarded $1.2 billion of operating subsidy during the fiscal year for PHAs. And it also received, further down, $1.450 billion in subsidies from HUD for Section 8 housing voucher programs, representing a $60 million increase over 2021. So my question is why is Section 8, which is a significantly less number of residents participating there than in public housing? Why are they getting a bigger subsidy?
Well, they're completely different programs.
Yes, I know.
They're managed different and the calculations are different. The opportunity for financial reward through the Section 8 program is significantly higher per unit. I mean, it's the very same reason that we are moving towards the new structure we have and trying to push items out the door into the trust. Because the trust has the availability to gain Section 8 funding, which is much more opportunistic than Section 9. So, I mean, it's just the way it is. The dollar values attached to Section 8 are much more lucrative. I'm not sure I can give the history behind why it is.
Is it because the market rents charged by private landlords is higher than what NYCHA could charge?
Well, of course, I mean, that's a driving force there, but, I mean, there are all different things that go into the calculation. It's just that the Section 8 payments have always been higher, and they're going to continue to be higher. They're just a different program.
Thank you.
Never mind.
Let me point out that on whatever the page it is on deposits, talked about the unrestricted deposits are held as bank interest-bearing accounts, and doesn't indicate here, as you do earlier, that they are secured somehow. Is there a difference?
Sorry, Mark, where are you looking?
Well, I'm looking at a different page with the thing that's
What page
labeled
is it?
deposits.
What page?
I'm on 34, if that means anything.
Same book?
The big book.
The big book.
Right. Consolidated Annual Financial.
The reference here is the deposits. And earlier on, you talk about the fact that the deposits are secure and all that good stuff. And here you don't. Is there a reason?
Well, I'm trying to locate where you are. Give me a second.
The bottom of my thing says page 34, but it's the note 2, deposits and investments.
Deposits and investments.
And the carryover page refers to the deposits, unrestricted deposits of $258 million. And it doesn't say anything about, it says held in interest-bearing accounts. It doesn't say anything that's consistent with your earlier statement that they are all secured.
Well, I see what you're referring to, and I mean, we do make reference in the first paragraph of number 2, collateral is comprised of U.S. Treasury notes. We also, in the last paragraph of note number 2, in investment policy and risks, on the custodial credit risk, we talk about the collateral includes U.S. Treasury notes and bonds.
I understand, but here you don't say, you say that covers this, okay, that's what it does.
And we can take a look at it and determine if we need to add further clarity
I
here.
just wonder about that. And then the other thing is here, we talk about the authority long-term holdings with U.S. government agency security and require the value be based on similar bonds. Okay, that's the pricing. Think about that. Little bits and pieces here.
I have one question concerning the statement of cash flows. Does NYCHA, where is the amount for reserves? Is that someplace in that cash flow statement, what the amount of money that NYCHA has for reserves for emergencies or for?
No, that doesn't appear in
Or for
the cash flow.
shortfalls or something? Is that any place in this financial statement?
Well, from an accounting perspective, we have the allowance for doubtful accounts, and that's noted in note number 3 and note number 4.
Okay,
If you're talking about operating reserves, or,
right.
I mean, that's not necessarily a GASB or a GAAP concept, so we don't disclose it in here. We do report that to HUD as per their format. They do measure us based on operating reserves, but it's not in here, nor is it required to be.
Oh, it's not required?
No.
Okay. But it's not required in LLC 1 either?
No.
Okay, thank you.
There's a reference in here to the first-time recognition of a current OPEB liability for $92 billion. I'm sorry again. There's a reference on page 15, the increase of 223 million is first-time recognition of current liability for 92. Is that the mistake that was made and not recognizing it? Or what calls for the first time recording of a $92 million liability here?
Well, this is not the same thing as the net investment in capital assets that we spoke about. In the 2021 audit, Deloitte pointed out that we had not been breaking out our OPEB liability between current and non-current, historically. And they recommended it, and it was determined to be immaterial, and it was very late in the process, so we left it in the non-current liability. However, as part of their management letter comments last year, they did recommend that we evaluate this for materiality going forward, and if it's material, we should record it to the financial statements. And we kind of had the same position this year that it wasn't necessarily material, but we thought it would be more transparent and more accurate to reclass this to current, so we did this in 2022. So the OPEB liability is now, 92 million is now on current liability.
The total OPEB liability remains the same. This is just classification between current and non-current.
All right, thank you.
So are there any more questions before we move on to LLC 1?
No.
One over there.
one earlier.
What page do you want?
One page sooner. Okay, so we're gonna see some of the same themes that we saw for NYCHA, just smaller dollar values. Tenant revenues increased by 11 million. This is largely due to the reversal of the allowance for doubtful accounts related to ERAF. If not for that, it'd probably be about the same or slightly lower. Total operating expenses up by $15.3 million.
Oops, sorry.
This includes $7.1 million for utility cost increase, $4.2 million for apartment paying contracts, $2.6 million for plumbing and heating contracts, $2.5 million for structural and support contracts, and partially offset by a reduction in NYCHA management fees charged. Subsidies increased by $12.4 million, largely due to an increase in federal operating subsidy. Special item 2022 was $68.6 million, primarily due to the impact of the new City of New York lead standard. So for the statement of revenues, I mean, they're pretty much the same patterns we saw in NYCHA. As I said, just smaller values. Are there any questions here before we move on to the next statement?
What is the reason for the $100 million change from 21 to 22? What's the rationale for that? There's from the 668 million in 2021 to the 772 net position change in 22. What's the difference? Why is the $104 million difference?
Richard, can you direct me to the line item you're speaking about?
Yeah, it's page 13, and it's the final net position end of year. So why did the net position change from the beginning of the year to the end of the year by $100 million?
Well, the net position is made up of all the lines above it. So the biggest driver there is the $69 million in the special item, pollution remediation.
Okay,
So that had a direct hit on the net position.
okay.
And then if you look at the line directly above that, and I'm gonna squint because I don't have my glasses on, I think it's 46 million. 46 million loss
Okay,
before special items, so that's really the sum of everything above it.
got it.
It's the low rent collections, it's the high expenses, and, I mean, this is a pattern that we've seen in LLC1 for several years.
Okay. I see. Thank you.
I want to point out on page 11, you're talking about current known facts and conditions. Whoops, I did not get it. Current known facts and conditions. You made a deliberate decision that COVID is no longer an issue. Certainly last year would have been.
There is no requirement regarding specifically which items we decide to report in this area, so we make some decisions relating to what is the biggest impact. From a 2022 perspective, you know, COVID has not prevented our abilities to inspect apartments, to abate apartments, to repair apartments, to service the tenants, which wasn't really a big problem in the past.
You don't think it has an impact on the tenant's ability to pay rent?
Well, it certainly does, but I mean, I think what's driving that is the unemployment, the unemployment rate. COVID may have created the problem initially, but what we have is the high unemployment rate, high inflation rates, high interest rates, I mean, general economic issues that are affecting the tenants. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just curious, on page 15, you have investing activities, and you have a blank line for unrealized. Why you went into that line? It has nothing applicable.
Bear with me a second while I catch up with you.
Page 15. blanks opposite, unrealized.
Oh, yeah,
It just looks odd.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think there's something we need to address there.
That's right.
So there's nothing,
There's nothing in there.
I think there probably should be something there.
okay.
All right,
I'm in the wrong book here.
okay, it was edited out. Okay.
See,
But I mean, yeah, it looks like there's an omission at this point in time, so we'll just look into that.
I'm sure in a document this size, there are lots of things. I have a strange proof, so I will give you Betty's box.
Expect nothing less.
There's one mention of Marlboro houses under LLC 1. It's a Brooklyn public housing. What is the rest of LLC 1 consist of?
Well, there are 13 developments in
Right,
LC one.
right.
Are you looking for the names or?
Yeah, I want to understand where these are located. I mean, Marlboro houses I know is Brooklyn, but I think.
I think they're all, I think they're not just in one particular borough.
Oh,
I don't think the bundles are just in one borough. They pick and choose different developments.
These are not bundles.
No?
These are the LLCs. These are not the packed bundles.
I'm
This is
sorry?
LLCs, this is separate, Victor.
But they are distributed in multiple
But they are in multiple boroughs. These are not the bundles. This has nothing to do with packed.
Did you hear what she said?
no, I can't hear.
What did she say?
The LLCs are not pack related. These are the LLCs we entered into previously. Okay, but they are in various boroughs.
I just want to know which buildings we're talking about.
Well, we can provide you a list of the developments. We don't have it with us right now, but we can send it to you.
Because I know one of them before was Ocean, which was Bayside, and there were some other ones before, but.
The 13 developments have been the original 13 developments going back to 2010.
2010.
So we have not executed any PAC transactions for LLC one as of yet.
Okay, now, wait a minute.
Upon information and belief, these are the developments in LLC one. Stapleton, Castle Hill, Marble Hill, I'm sorry, I'll tell you the borough. Stapleton, Staten Island, Castle Hill, Bronx, Marble Hill,
I said, they're not in the same.
Bronx, St. Mary's Park, Bronx, Bayview, Brooklyn, Bushwick, Brooklyn, Marlboro, Brooklyn, Amsterdam Edition in Manhattan, Chelsea, Manhattan, June Hamilton, same, Samuel Houses, Manhattan, Manhattanville, Manhattan, Rutgers Houses, Manhattan, and that's it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Where does Wise Towers fall under?
Manhattan. Oh, I'm sorry, LLC two.
Thank you.
And why is this not in LLC two anymore though?
No, I know.
Right.
I know. Believe me, I know, we're section 8 now. But Park 200 or back, one or the other.
Okay, before we move on, are there any questions on this page? Next slide, please. Okay. So looking at the statement of net position, cash decreased by 25 million due to continued rent collection challenges and growing expenses. Capital assets decreased by 17 million, largely due to $26 million of depreciation during 2022, partially offset by $9 million in new building improvements. The only significant change in liabilities is a $62 million increase in pollution remediation, affected primarily by the change in the restricted lead standard. So that wraps up LLC 1. And the slides, we do not have a presentation for LLC 2. LLC 2 is inactive. after the last PAC transactions were executed in December of 2021. There is still some minimal activity during 2022. There were some subsidies leaking in. There was some rent collections that were coming in and out, some expenses being incurred. Ultimately, we will dissolve this company when time allows for it, when it's practical to do. We don't think that's gonna be in 2022. So we don't have any financial statements to present to you. They were not audited. We did not request them to be audited. What exists on their balance sheet is, I don't know, probably just cash, maybe 10, 15 million, I don't recall the exact amount of cash that's there, and some intercompany transactions with NYCHA. So eventually, once everything is resolved, we'll wind down the entity and we'll dissolve and put it through a liquidation process. That may be in 2024. I would think it probably could be, but we don't have an exact plan for that right now.
So where will those revenues show up?
Well, there really aren't any, I mean,
Will that transfer?
there are where the revenues that are in LLC two now.
That's correct.
I mean, during LLC two, and LLC two is still technically a component of NYCHA,
Right.
one unit of NYCHA, very small dollars involved. So it's going into NYCHA's financial statements, as it always did.
Thank you.
So with that said, the presentation for the ACFR financial statements is complete. Be happy to take any more questions.
This document, this is Deloitte's document?
Yes.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. We're gonna move straight into Deloitte's audit committee letter, that is a SAS 114, and management rep letter for 2022 audit. Jill?
Thank you. So Deloitte is in the process of completing the audits for both the New York City Housing Authority and the New York City Housing Authority Public Housing Preservation 1 LLC. As of and for the year ended December 31, 2022. Just a reminder, we conduct our audits in accordance with two sets of standards, one being generally accepted auditing standards set forth by the AICPA. And the second set of standards are government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. We expect to issue our reports next week sometime. We're targeting June 24th as our report and issuance date. We have a few concluding procedures that we need to complete before next week. We call them reporting procedures, final referencing of the financial statements, getting final support for footnotes, subsequent event reviews, as well as getting the management representation letter signed by management. On page 1 of the letter are the responsibilities of the auditor underneath the auditing standards. I won't go over these in detail, these are the same auditing standards that you've seen in prior years, no changes. On page 2, I'm gonna highlight significant accounting policies. The authority's significant accounting policies are set forth in the notes to the financial statements. As Jeff went through in great detail, we are aware of one significant change in accounting policies this year, and it relates to the adoption of GASB Statement 87 and policies related to lease accounting. We are not aware of any other significant changes in previously adopted accounting policies or their application for the year ended December 31, 2022. Uncorrected misstatements at the bottom of page 2. Jeff did mention this and we highlighted in this letter as well. There was an item that management did discover related to the net investment in capital assets, the NYCHA net position component, which was corrected in 2022 but was not corrected in 2021. We have assessed that. We do agree with management's conclusion and the presentation in this set of financial statements. But I just do need to highlight it here as there is a prior year 2021 item that was not corrected. Moving to page 3, there were no material misstatements that we brought to the attention of management during the course of our audits. We did not have any disagreements with management related to matters that are material or immaterial to the authority's 2022 financial statements. In our view, we had the full cooperation of management throughout the performance of our audits. I will touch management representations in a moment. At the bottom of page 3, it goes into the form and content of the auditor's report. We do have a couple of emphasis of matter paragraphs in both the NYCHA as well as LLC 1 report. In NYCHA, we have an emphasis of matter related to the adoption of GASB 87. We do feel that in our professional judgment, it is important to highlight to the reader that NYCHA did adopt GASB 87 and recorded $824 million of right to use assets on the statement of net position. For NYCHA Preservation LLC 1, we have an emphasis of matter related to the fact that this LLC 1 is a component unit of NYCHA. NYCHA is a component unit of the city, and that LLC 1 requires significant subsidies and has material transactions with NYCHA.
Excuse me,
Yes.
this paragraph concerning LLC 1 is incorrect, I believe. It says on page 4, as discussed in note 18 to the financial statements, it says the authority. It should say the LLC 1. I believe that needs to be corrected.
Under LLC 1.
That quote, the authority is a component unit of NYCHA. No, the authority is NYCHA.
Yes.
LLC is a component
Right.
unit of NYCHA.
Yes. It's,
So
in our opinion,
both
I
of
think
those-
it does read
Both of those
LLC 1.
statements where it says the authority needs to be changed to LLC 1,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Thank you. So would you please make that? Huh? You see the quote? Where it says NYCHA page 4, NYCHA Public Housing Preservation LLC 1, 1 LLC. Then it says, the quote, as discussed in note 18 to the finance, you see that? As page over there.
I agree with you.
You agree? So, I'm proofreader. I'm sorry, I took over Mark's job of proofreading.
So I just want, I'll point out, in under tab 4 of your book, page 1 is a copy of Deloitte's opinion, and Richard, it is correct in the actual Deloitte opinion, it just didn't get copied into this letter correctly, but just for your comfort, if you go to page 1 of tab 4, you will see the correct LLC 1 reference.
Okay. Okay, I don't.
Let's go on
I don't
to this
read
letter.
Okay.
On page 5, second paragraph, it said, in connection with our audits, our responsibility is to read other information. What are we talking about here?
So, moving on to, so what I just was talking about previous was the emphasis of matters. Then moving down, we have other matter paragraphs. These other matter paragraphs are required to be in the independent auditor's report, and they relate to 2 items, required supplementary information as well as other information. The other information relates to the introductory and the statistical sections of the ACFR, in which the auditor's responsibility, we don't opine on the introductory or the statistical section, and these paragraphs.
No, the problem I have is, you say you're to read other information. I recognize, sorry again, I read other information. I assume you do, but there's no way of knowing what you're referring to here. Could be the telephone directory.
Mark, these paragraphs are copied directly from our opinion.
Well, I understand that, but it didn't make sense. Your responsibility is to read other information. That's fine, but about what?
So if you were to read on page 4, the other matter paragraph, there is underneath the title, other matter paragraph, there's a sentence that talks about what other matter paragraphs are. And they're pulled directly from our independent auditor's report.
Well, if you're cross-referencing back to that paragraph on page 4, maybe it'd be better. But the fact that the way you've got it open-ended here, it's hard to understand. I may be the only one. And then there's some little odds and ends I see here. You have on page 3, you say, in our judgment, we received full cooperation. I'm not accustomed to seeing, I've seen other statements from other auditors that we have received but not modified with our judgment. Is that something new?
No. I guess that's just the way the Deloitte template that we have that for all of our clients is written.
Okay. Now, then going before that, probably the same thing. You have throughout the year, routine discussions were held. About what? There's no substance to that.
Just routine discussions around accounting matters, accounting topics.
I understand
Right.
that, but it's a broader statement than.
What? Page 3, right? It's number 4, significant.
Now, the other thing is, you have here that you, on page, what is it? Page 1, you say that in the paragraph 1, with the oversight of the Audit and Finance Committee. So you're saying that what we do here is oversight?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
What paragraph is that? Oh, I see, yeah, oversight.
So it tells us what we're doing, folks.
Oh, that's good.
I'll just let you know that this Deloitte letter is very standard. It's a similar letter that we share with all of our audit committees of all of our different types of clients and all different types of industries.
Okay.
Well, the same thing on page 5 where we talk about to read other information. It's very broad.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, wait, there's one here I really didn't like.
They don't believe in topics.
You say here that
What page?
the last page, we plan to issue a separate report to be dated, whatever date it is, containing matters involving authority, internal control, we identified that we consider to be deficiencies. So that's the letter, the next part of your conversation, is that it?
All right, I believe that's at the September meeting. Any internal control deficiencies that come out of our audit, we will share with you at that meeting. There are some low-level deficiencies related to IT that will be shared with you at that meeting.
So in effect, we won't hear about that. Right now, we're approving your opinion.
If there were any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, I would let you know about them today. I have none of those. And any what we call lower level matters will be shared with you in September.
Okay.
We consider deficiencies though, all right. Now, are you finished with your letter now?
I was just going to go over the management representation letter at the back.
Okay, because I have, let me just point out, there's something here on page 9 called the lost triangle. What is that?
It's an actuarial term that the actuaries use to develop the claims liability. So there's about projected data based on history, claims data, occurrence data, and they build it in the form of what looks like a triangle, and that's what they ultimately used to help determine the final liability amounts that were recorded in the financial statements. It's a technical
So
actuarial
it's
term.
technical, I
Yes,
just
that's
wasn't
right.
familiar with it.
Yeah. I think the key thing to take away from this letter, which is a standard Deloitte letter, is that we received the full cooperation from NYCHA's management. No material audit adjustments were brought to the attention of management, and we'll be ready to issue our report, next week.
Well, all right, let me, a couple of things there.
And then the rep letter is starts on page 11. We wanted to share with you, the 2022 management rep letter. It's still going through final reviews, ahead of next week. But this letter shows you in track changes version, what's changed from the 2021 letter to 2022's letter. If you scroll down one page, please. Most of the edits are just, minor in nature, change the GASB codification references, which tends to update from one year to the next. Removal from prior year on the next page of some matters that were in last year's letter that are no longer needed in this year's letter.
You must like that footnote that you have on page 13, because you have the same footnote on page 14.
Because that's a management request.
All right, so why is management saying the same thing twice?
Because it's referenced in a couple of different places.
Okay,
For the settlement agreement? Footnote?
yeah, it's the same footnote.
Same footnote throughout the packet.
But necessary.
Okay.
There are additional reps in here related to GASB 87, which are, now that NYCHA has implemented the new standard, there are new reps related to GASB 87 as well. And the other three new GASBs that were implemented this year that had no impact as well.
And of course, the capital letter of the city of New York.
On page 21, what is the purpose of the inclusion of the change of the GHI senior care plan from to Aetna and the HIP VIP plan? What's the purpose of putting in that statement?
So in Rep 58, there were updates to this rep related to the OPEB plan,
Yeah,
based on recent developments.
yeah, okay.
Essentially, your OPEB, what's going on with this plan, this Aetna Medicare Advantage PPO plan has no impact on your OPEB liability at this time,
Oh, it has no impact, one way or the other.
not at this time.
No, but it is a subsequent event, unrecognized subsequent event. Because the announcement took place after year end, it does not have to be recorded, but it still needs to be disclosed, so we do have it in our notes.
That it might affect OPEB in the
Well,
future.
that it might affect the OPEB liability in 2023. Of course, we've been through this before, and then found that, this went into the courts and was challenged and was stricken. Now it's risen again, so it's supposed to be effective September 1. I'm not sure if it's gonna happen or not, but it's something that we need to disclose.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Is the Audit and Finance Committee usually CC'd on this letter, or not?
This letter is addressed to you.
Yes. No, the letter is,
Oh, the management
the
representation.
management letter is signed by the management.
Right, and I'm required to share a copy of the rep letter as a part of this communication
Okay,
letter, if it was an attachment.
But the Audit Committee is not CC'd on this letter.
No.
We'll see it anyhow.
What?
We'll see it anyhow.
We'll see it anyway, but not officially CC'd. Okay, got it. Thank you.
I see a lot of these things, and given the complications under which you operate, it's a remarkable event that you get this thing out the way you do.
Well, give credit to the team that's out there.
I mean that for everybody, because
Yep.
the rule system moves underfoot, and it's hard to think of how you can come up with something as definitive as this and do it in a way, so I just, notwithstanding some of the questions I asked, I want to express my appreciation for the kind of work that has to go into a document like this.
We appreciate it, thank you.
I second the motion.
But I will give you,
All right, thank you very much, Jill. Mr. Chairman, we have listened to the financial report of NYCHA, and the motion is now in order to recommend the approval of the audited 2022 financial statements to the board.
Before we do that, I need to confer with Mr. Goldberg. Jason, can you come here a second? I need to ask you something. It all pertains to yesterday's conversation. Out loud in this meeting. So we can add it to the
Like Brad and Wilson.
Okay, so,
The motion is,
I need to add something that wasn't part of the agenda, but is something very important that we need to discuss today. And that is the letter that was sent, that we're planning on sending to Dominique Bloom, the General Deputy Assistant Secretary. And I think we could not discuss this, so do we have anything that we need to do with this? Any adjustments, fellow committee members,
of the
on
audit.
this letter? Did you read it?
Yes, I read it.
Yes. Are there any things that we disagree upon?
This is the letter to the secretary?
Yes.
That had nothing to do with the audit, does it?
No, a motion on the
No,
floor.
no.
The
What I'm-
motion,
what-
the motion is on the floor.
Well, I was trying to get, before the motion was made,
We do
I
that.
was trying to get this done.
We could do it afterwards.
We can't do that, and it'll still be part of the meeting.
You're not adjourning. Your motion.
Not adjourning,
You're
just
not
need the
adjourning
motion.
yet.
Since you have a motion
It's
on the
not a
floor.
motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Okay, the motion is that the recommendation for the board's approval of the financial statements of NYCHA 2022.
So move.
That's been moved.
Can you repeat the motion, please? Repeat the motion.
A motion to recommend to the NYCHA's board for the approval of the financial statement for 2022.
So moved.
Can I amend that? Is this, isn't it called something different? It's called the consolidated, it's called the Consolidated Annual Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for 2022. That's what it's called, the full name. So can I make a motion?
Sure.
Can I amend your motion to call it exactly what it says? Which is not the financial report, but in addition, it says we are approving the Consolidated Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for 2022. The full name.
It's approved by the,
That's what
That's
I'm
correct.
recommending the motion read.
and it's also based upon the auditor's report.
Right, based on
That's the proper motion.
That's a motion.
Richard, yes. Are you making the
Okay.
motion?
yes, I'm making
Okay,
that
so you first
motion.
need a
I
motion.
second the motion. Oops, you do. I second the motion.
And all in favor?
I,
We will now go to the Deloitte status update on the 2022 single compliance audit.
So this is regarding the federal programs, which is called single audit. We have completed our risk assessment this year, and this year we have selected 3 programs, federal programs to be audited for 2022. One of them is Department of Homeland Security, it's called FEMA. It's called, actually the name is the Disaster Grant Program. And 2 of them will be from the HUD program. One is Public and Indian Housing Capital, and Public and Indian Housing Authority. Both programs we have audited last year's, and due to the high risk because of the material findings, we had to redo them in 2022. We have started our audit procedures. We have selected some samples, we have selected some special tests, and the plan is to complete by September 30, 2023. And at that time, we'll be also submitting to the REACT, which is the HUD required forms. But it will be completed by September 30th.
September 30th?
Yeah.
It's here.
Okay.
I take it there's nothing we need to do other than just listen.
That's right, there's really nothing, there's no findings at this point, no control matters that we need to discuss with you at this point. We're in the early stages of completing our single audit.
So just a status report. Okay. Do we have to make a motion to approve the LLC 1 report? Or is that part of the annual, is that part of the full annual comprehensive?
Just in case somebody needs it later, why don't we make
Why don't we make a
a
motion?
supplemental motion that covers everything?
Right.
Yes, it includes LLC one.
It's included at C1 also.
It's included in the consolidated?
Yes, it's consolidated.
Is it included? I don't think so.
Separate opinions. Separate opinions, separate.
Are separate.
I think we have to have a separate motion.
That's what I said.
We have to have a separate motion for LLC 1, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
I did it.
LLC one also.
so it's a second motion.
So we want to enter a second motion for the approval on the recommendation of LLC 1 to the board for approval.
so move.
That's been moved.
Richard, you did it, so you might as well credit.
Approved. Yes.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
I,
Ayes have it.
Thank you. Now I guess we can raise the key.
are we done? Okay.
We're done then.
You want to discuss the letter, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm gonna discuss now. So, this is more for the board members, the committee members. Have you had a chance to read the letter that we're planning on sending to the General Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing?
Yes.
Unless it's a change from the version sent before, yes.
Okay, are there any things that we need to change?
Well, I would like to just make a suggestion that the final paragraph prior to the thank you for your consideration, I believe there should be just a summary of the request. In other words, Roman numeral 2 is the relationship between the environment, it's a description. And thank you for your consideration, but before the thank you, I would suggest that there be a summary or something just simply indicating what it is that NYCHA is actually requesting. In other words, the request is for a waiver from the, NYCHA is requesting a waiver from the April 22 special test environmental containment testing, and it's just it's to request a waiver from that requirement, that regulation, because it currently has an agreement with HUD for the special monitor concerning this issue.
But it's explained within the body of the letter.
No, I understand that, but I'm just making an editorial suggestion that at the bottom of the letter, okay, after all of this discussion, that NYCHA repeat what it is requesting from HUD, that's all. Because there's no ask here.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I think up top at the beginning of the letter, we say we're actually asking you to consider not including the special test in the compliance supplement on a going-forward basis. We're not asking for a waiver from it. It's because we think the special test is already
Well,
repetitive.
you want to bring the attention.
But we can definitely add, we can definitely reiterate that at the end, I agree with you, we definitely want to conclude more.
Well, I would like to see an ask.
Yeah, so the ask would be that they not include the special test.
That's correct, number one. And number two, that the independent financial auditor, not have a matter, what is it called, a special matter or something?
Special test, yeah, I'm not sure, I don't think they have the ability to waive it.
It's calling it a finding, a material, that it's gonna automatically be a material finding. Because we're not following the OMB regulation. And so as a result, we're not gonna do that, but it's gonna be the same material finding for the next 20 years, as far as I can see. So it seems to me that we should be requesting a waiver from not only the OMB regulation, but also a waiver for the requirement to have the independent financial auditor, do a test of this issue, and should not provide they should not be providing an exception, to.
Because in the body of the letter, it says.
It says.
Yeah, but it's buried in there.
Yeah, we can definitely reiterate it. I just wanted to point out it's.
It's buried in there, all the information is in there, but at the end, what's the HUD supposed to do?
Right.
That's what I'm saying, we should clarify what it is we want them to do.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, it wouldn't be a formal waiver, it would just be asking them to remove the test from the supplement. So I don't think there is an ability for her to waive it for a particular entity that receives federal funds, so we would just be saying, this test you added, please remove it. So that's what we're asking them to do. But we'll definitely
So what he's saying is just the ask.
Yeah, well, definitely
It's
make
gotta
it.
be
At the end.
clear, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, once that's done, is there anything else so that we can get this letter finalized and
Other than that,
send it?
No.
No,
No, what else?
no, other than that, no.
Oh, no, so that's it. So once you get that together, as soon as you get it together, let us know, we'll approve
Yeah,
it.
well, Jeff and I
It'll
will
be on its way.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't think we need to reapprove the new format. We made enough.
So we just said this is good?
This says, we made a suggestion, hope they'll take it.
Okay,
Exactly.
so be
Right,
it.
but the members
No
are
need to
signing
be.
this letter, right? This letter's coming from the members,
Yeah.
right? So
We do it.
we will send it back to you for signature.
Okay.
Okay? For review and signature.
Okay,
So given that the audit for single audit has already begun, it needs to be completed within the next couple of months. This test needs to begin relatively soon. So obviously, we all need to do our best to expedite this process if we have a chance to get this exception taken care of for this year.
This is why I'm trying to expedite it now. So as soon as it's done, just bring it to us so we can get it signed.
Well, if you're looking for a little more heft, do you want the audit committee to sign off on this letter by having the signature of the chairman of the audit committee attached? I don't know what has the greater impact on the political issue here.
No.
Well, I do wanna get it in as quickly as
Well,
possible.
no, I understand that, I'm just saying,
The letterhead is from Lisa Bova Hyatt.
you know, she's,
That's the letterhead. So presumably, the chairman, the interim executive office, chief CEO will sign this.
no, but I'm thinking about whether we put the
You
signature.
requested this letter,
Okay,
right?
so therefore the audit
You
committee,
requested for
so,
us to draft it, so
Will
that,
sign.
right, and your
Okay.
review,
The
right,
question
us
is whether or
initiate
not
the
audit
draft
committee
for your
signs
signature.
off on this.
well, that's
She's
what
explaining.
Vilma is explaining,
So-
is that we've requested it, so therefore we should sign it.
Oh, good, good,
Okay,
good.
so we settle on it?
We're settled.
Okay.
But we need to see the final paragraph, or at least the ask.
We will send you the final draft, if you're okay with it, then you guys can sign.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
That concludes our business.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there being no other matters to be addressed, Mr. Chairman, want to thank everyone for their attendance at this meeting, and a motion is in order for the adjournment.
The only problem is that normally we have a private session with the auditor, is just ask the question, where we get, nothing else, a pro forma answer. But given the business now of what the open rules are, this would be the first time I've ever signed off on an audit without having a private session with the auditor. I think that we got to find a way to deal with this.
What did we say?
This one.
The custom in the world I live in is before a board signs off on an audit, the audit committee or the board has a private session with the auditor and not with management. And we've done that in the past here. And now as a result of whatever is going on, we don't seem to be able to do that. And there's nothing, until we've sorted our way through it, but I wanted to record my unhappiness with the fact that we can't do what's been a custom in every audit committee I sit on. Up to and including the New York City Audit Committee. I don't know what we're gonna do about it.
We have a motion.
We have a motion on the floor.
So,
Yes, boy.
I already moved it, I don't know if they want a second.
I'll second our motion to.
Okay, it has been moved by Victor Gonzalez. Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Cool. All in favor?
Aye.
That's been carried. Thank you all very much. And our next, it's now 12 o'clock, and our next Audit and Finance Committee meeting will be on September 12, 2023.
So,